Mr. President, can you explain why you did not condemn those hate groups by name over the weekend?
They've been condemned. They have been condemned.
And why are we not having a press conference today? You said on Friday you'd have a press conference.
We had a press conference. We just had a press conference.
Can we ask you some more questions, sir?
It doesn't bother me at all, but I like real news, not fake news. Give fake news. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Hat, and welcome to Hat's Guerrilla News. In my thumbnail, I posed the question, should we boycott the United Kingdom? My answer is a resounding yes, with an exclamation point, with 2 exclamation points. Why is simple. It has become an entirely regressive country. The will of the people is not being heard. Look at the Brexit negotiations, or the lack thereof, for an example of that. There is no right to self-protection. I'll show that in a little bit. There is no right to free speech. I'll show that in a little bit. And it does not protect its citizens from harm. Well, at least the white citizens. It seems to be very, very interested in keeping brown people from not suffering the slings and arrows of outrageous Twitter posts. With that said, let's get to it. The current gun control debate in the United States often focuses on places like Great Britain and their restrictive firearm laws. Here's a look at some of that legislation. Here's what you have to go through in the UK in order to obtain a firearm certificate. The police must be satisfied that a person has a good reason to own each firearm and that they can be trusted with it without danger to the public safety or to the peace. A very broad phrase. Under Home Office guidelines, firearm certificates are only issued if a person has legitimate sporting, collecting, or work-related reasons for ownership. Here's the bad part. Since 1968, self-defense has not been considered a valid reason to own a firearm. You cannot own a firearm if you want to defend yourself. You would think someone would have the right to self-preservation. We enjoy that right in the United States, provided by the Second Amendment, provided by the Constitution. But no, not in the UK. Not only do you not have free speech, which we'll get to later, you do not have the right to defend yourself. That is what happens when you allow yourself to be governed by feelings rather than actual facts. Now, the rest of this talks about the different licensing procedures you have to go through, including 2 witnesses of your character, your doctor's approval, a face-to-face interview, and a thorough investigation by special branch. Not to mention home inspections. Adding insult to injury, these certificates must be renewed every 5 years, meaning you have to go through the process all over again. Sure, very reasonable. So here's a list of the top 4 categories of prohibited firearms in the UK. Fully automatic or burst fire weapons, which may include some air guns. Semi-automatic or pump-action rifles that fire centerfire ammunition, like the Colt AR-15 or the L1A1, which is a variant of the British battle rifle. Cartridge ammunition handguns, regardless of caliber. And firearms disguised as another item, like walking sticks, mobile telephones, etc. In the US, those would be categorized as any other weapon. So you'll notice here, semi-automatic or pump-action rifles that fire centerfire ammunition. That means if you want to own a rifle that does anything other than load 1 round at a time, you've got to own a .22 rimfire. Now, .22 rimfire is the most popular cartridge in the world, but it is also quite deadly in the right hands and at the right distances. So I don't see how this is any more of a life-saving measure than banning centerfire ammunition of any caliber. I guess they had to just go with something. This is a rifle that's legal in the UK. It's a Henry Golden Boy. You can get it in 22 short, long, and long rifle. All of those will fire out of 1 firearm. You can also get it in 22 Magnum or 17 HMR. My dad has the 22 short, long rifle version. You can fire 17 long rifle cartridges out of this rifle in less than 20 seconds. If you're any good at all. Even without practice, you can do it in less than 30. Aimed fire. So this is obviously, like any other firearm, quite deadly in the right hands. Yet it's legal in the UK. Now, they did ban basically all handguns except black powder versions. So defensive use of a handgun is basically not going to happen in the UK unless you're a very specialized person who's allowed to keep one for the reasons I just listed earlier. As you can see, gun restriction laws really make no sense. The reason all handguns, aside from black powder versions, are banned in the United Kingdom is the Dunblane school massacre that took place in March of 1996. 16 children and one teacher were shot dead with one nut job using a handgun. He ultimately killed himself. It took 5 minutes for this to happen. As it says at the bottom, in response, 2 new firearm acts were passed which outlawed private ownership of most handguns in Great Britain. At least they figured out that the most pervasive firearm used in deadly shootings is a handgun. The current U.S. legislation being pushed through Congress is trying to ban all semi-automatic weapons, basically, which pretty much means all firearms except for very few. But it especially focuses on semi-automatic rifles, which are much, much less likely to be used in a firearm assault than a handgun. In fact, you're more likely to be killed by a handgun by almost an order of magnitude than you are by a rifle. So as I just said about the Henry, you can see how any kind of firearm legislation doesn't really do any good. There are too many cracks, and there are too many broad bands of different firearms that really make no sense once you look at them specifically. This is why the phrase common sense gun legislation has no real meaning. Now you would think with all this gun banning that gun violence in the UK would be low and would stay low. Well, look at the statistic. Gun crime offenses in London surged by 42% in the last year, according to official statistics. The Metropolitan Police's figures showed there were 2,544 gun crime offenses from April 2016 to April 2017, compared to 1,793 offenses from 2015 until 2016. Knife crime also increased by 24%, with 12,074 recorded offenses from 2016 to 2017. These statistics are for London alone, not the entire United Kingdom. So as you can see, there is a really severe problem here. Why is that happening? Well, there are a number of reasons, but here's a pretty good one. This is Sadiq Khan. He's been mayor of London since 2016. Khan is much more than mayor of London, however. He's well steeped in international affairs, such as trying to ban Donald Trump's state visit because he says the U.S. president is wrong about many things, therefore the state visit to Britain should not go ahead. This man is on top of things. He really, really knows how to run a city. Violent crime may be up, but he knows where the focus really should lie, like banning posters of beautiful women on the London Metro. I'm sure this has nothing to do with his Muslim beliefs whatsoever. I'm sure it's pure feminism. Khan is obviously a man of priorities. When he's not banning beach-body-ready posters on the London Metro, he's hard at work doing things that matter. For instance, not keeping track of known ISIS fighters returning to London. In an interview, Piers Morgan asked Khan how come almost 200 ISIS fighters returning to London had been lost, that were no longer being tracked. This is Khan's reply. Because the Met Police budget, roughly speaking 15% to 20%, is funded by me, the mayor. The rest comes from central government. If the Met Police is being shrunk and reduced, they've got to prioritize in a sensible, savvy way. I don't know what could be a higher priority than violent crime and returning terrorists, but Khan does have a point. There are fewer UK policemen than there were back in 2010. In fact, there are 20,000 fewer. Could the collapse in police numbers have anything to do with mass immigration and the strain these people have put on the British economy and social services? I'll bet it does. The Labour Party says bring in more. The Tory Party? Silent. But Khan was right. You have to prioritize. You have to figure out what needs to be done and then go forward. So where are the UK police focusing most? Where are their greatest efforts being put forth? You probably already know the answer, but try not to get ahead of me. Yes, the British police are wasting their time on social media and hate speech, as they would like to call it. British police accused of wasting time as hate speech arrests up almost 900% in some areas. A staggering rise in online hate crime as people are attacked over Twitter, Facebook, and other social media sites has led to a gigantic leap in arrests in Britain. British police are arresting 9 people per day for attacks on the internet as they attempt to clamp down on hate speech online. In some areas, this is up almost 900% from 2014. The number of people detained for alleged attacks over the internet has rocketed in 2 years as social media allows users to verbally attack others. Verbally attack. So what does that mean? Who has done a verbal attack, as they would put it, that would result in actual criminal prosecution? I think you know who. Yes, Count Dankula, the infamous and completely egregious behavior by Count Dankula has landed him in British court. Prosecutors accuse YouTube comedian Count Dankula of colluding with Pug to gas football stadiums. Marcus Meacham, the popular YouTube comedian better known as Count Dankula, faces hate crime charges for publishing a video in which he taught his girlfriend's Pug to do the Nazi salute. The 30-year-old YouTube entertainer was charged with committing a hate crime after he recorded his girlfriend's Pug Buddha responding to statements like gas the Jews and Sieg Heil by raising its paw. Meacham has made it repeatedly clear in his YouTube videos that he does not have Nazi sympathies and denies being a racist. The phrases he used in the joke video were simply the most horrible phrases he could think of. He made the same argument in court. This is where it gets good. Prosecutors disagree with Meacham and say that the video was an odious criminal act that was dressed up to look like a joke. The Crown contention is that the inclusion of the dog is an attempt to muddy the waters around him making, producing, and posting the video. The Crown is laughably saying that the dog is a dog whistle for Nazis to come out and support him in his efforts to really gas Jews, to attack entire stadiums full of people. This is where British legal efforts are going, in ever-increasing numbers. Where they're not going are places like Rochdale, Rotherham, and Telford. Do those cities mean anything to you? They should. These 3 cities are home to grooming gangs, also known as rape gangs, also known as rape, kidnapping, and murder gangs in one instance, that have been a complete plague upon British society since the 90s, perhaps even sooner. They are almost exclusively perpetrated by what the British police tacitly call Asian men, which is actually a euphemism for Pakistanis. I'm not trying to draw a broad brush over an entire country here. It's just a matter of fact that these grooming gangs are almost completely comprised of Pakistani men. Look at the upper right corner. 1 white guy. So, what happened here? Rochdale grooming case. 9 men jailed for up to 25 years each. Serious sexual abuse, including rape of vulnerable teenage girls, took place between 2005 and 2013. Kind of an interesting time frame, isn't it? 2005 to 2013. You think no one came forward until 2016, 2017? Well, actually, they did. The principal victim in the case, who was abused by all of the defendants, walked into a police station in 2012 claiming to know about Rochdale grooming after news emerged of the convictions of a number of Asian men for grooming white girls for sex. The victim reported that when she was aged 14 and 15, she was repeatedly sexually groomed by a large number of men from the Rochdale area. The victim, described by prosecutors as an extremely vulnerable young woman who had a difficult home life and a learning disability, said her phone number had been passed around and that hundreds of men would ring her wanting to meet for sex. 2012 was when the investigation got started. You have to ask, what happened to that initial complaint? Why didn't the police act upon it sooner? Is it possible that the girl's case was seen as not worthy to investigate? That she was somehow unworthy of their time? Or could it have been something along the lines of, if we arrest Pakistani men, we'll be seen as racist. We must protect the brown people at all costs. Or is it a combination of the two? Let's look at Rotherham. This is a very involved Wikipedia article. I'm just going to hit the top part. Of course, the link will be in the description, so you can check it out. I highly recommend you do. I'll have another recommendation after this part is over. The Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal has been described as the biggest child protection scandal in UK history. Keep that in mind. It'll come up again. From the late 1980s until the 2010s, organized child sexual abuse continued almost unchallenged by legal authorities in the northern English town of Rotherham, South Yorkshire. It was first documented in the early 1990s when care home managers investigated reports that children in their care were being picked up by taxi drivers. From at least 2001, multiple reports passed names of alleged perpetrators, several from one family, to the police and Rotherham Council. The first group conviction took place in 2010, when 5 British Pakistani men, told you, were convicted of sexual offenses against girls aged 12 to 16, but the ringleaders remained at large from the 1990s until 2010, and there were relatively few convictions until 2016. Now, is that the worst? Maybe not. If you're at all interested in finding out the true story of Rotherham, more than you'll get out of just a wiki article, you should read Peter McLaughlin's Easy Meat. I have a copy here. I got it as soon as it came out. It is devastating. I've put the Amazon link in the description. I highly recommend you buy it and read it as soon as you can. Now, I will note, it is disturbing. It is a very tough read in some areas, but this is important. People need to know about this, and they need to be educated about what's been going on in the UK for so long. Unfortunately, it did not end at Rotherham. This is about a grooming, kidnapping, rape, and murder gang in Telford. Britain's worst ever child grooming scandal. I thought we just looked at the worst ever. No, it keeps getting worse. Britain's worst ever child grooming scandal exposed. Hundreds of young girls raped, beaten, sold for sex, and some even killed. Up to 1,000 children could have suffered in Britain's worst known abuse scandal, where sex gangs targeted girls as young as 11. The rape hell of vulnerable young girls in one town, Telford, went on for a shocking 40 years, the Sunday Mirror can reveal. Let me repeat that. 40 years. As many as 1,000 children could have suffered at the merciless hands of perverts and torturers in Telford since the 1980s. Girls as young as 11 had been lured from their families to be drugged, beaten, raped in an epidemic that victims say is still ongoing. 3 people were murdered and 2 others died in tragedies linked to this scandal. The murder victims were a mother, a daughter, and her sister whose house was set ablaze while they were in it by the Pakistani man who had been raping the girl and who had fathered a child with her. Those murders were used as a way to keep the other girls silent, as they were threatened with the same treatment if they went to the police or told their families about it. Some of these girls had multiple pregnancies, multiple abortions, and some had to raise the children of the men who had been raping them. Now again, how could this have gone on for so long? Well, it's very simple. Despite similar high-profile cases in Rochdale and Rotherham, authorities in Telford repeatedly failed to stamp out a network of abusers. Social workers knew of abuse in the 1990s, but police took a decade to launch a probe. Council staff viewed abused and trafficked children as prostitutes instead of victims, according to previously unseen files. Authorities failed to keep details of abusers from Asian communities for fear of racism. I told you, Asian equals Pakistani. In fact, I understand that the UK crime statistics are going to start using the term Oriental to designate between Eastern Asians and Pakistanis, because the East Asian communities are tired of being lumped in with this Asian category made up specifically for Pakistani men. They're tired of being tarred with the same brush. Police failed to investigate one recent case 5 times until a Minister of Parliament intervened. One victim said cops tried to stop her, finding out why her abusers had not been prosecuted because they feared she would talk to us being the Mirror. The scale of the abuse uncovered in Telford, population 170,000, is feared to be the most brutal and long-running of all. The Rotherham toll was put at 1,500, but that was in a community of 260,000. Telford's Tory MP Lucy Allen, the Tories are the nominal Conservative Party in the UK, has demanded a public inquiry and said the mirror's findings were extremely serious and shocking. I'd say that's an understatement. This is a complete and utter failure of the city and the police force to do their job merely because they were afraid of being seen as racist. You can make a joke about a pug doing a Sieg Heil salute and you'll be taken to court, but you can rape, kidnap, and murder children as young as 11, and you're allowed to do it for 40 years. Let's move on from British authorities silencing rape victims to the silencing this weekend of 3 political dissenters from the outside. People named Sellner, Pettibone, and Southern. Identitarian activists Martin Sellner and Brittany Pettibone detained at Heathrow ahead of planned speech. Now, this must have been one really wallop-packing speech. I mean, we're talking torch-bearing, pitchfork-holding mobs rioting through London because of this guy's actions, because of this guy's words. I mean, seriously, he must have been a complete and utter threat to British rule. Maybe not. Austrian hipster right identitarian leader Martin Sellner was detained and refused entry to Britain on Friday at Heathrow Airport ahead of a planned speech at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London. Sellner, along with his partner, YouTube political commentator and author Brittany Pettibone, was refused entry into the UK, according to the British branch of the Generation Identity movement. In a press release, the group said that Sellner and Pettibone arrived in Britain at Luton Airport at 1 p.m. and were told they were being detained because of the planned speech, with authorities claiming Sellner represented a far-right group and intends to incite racial hatred. If the UK is so intent on racial harmony, maybe it should stop allowing Muslim rape gangs to roam free for nearly a half-century and victimize young white girls. Maybe that would be a start. The pair were then moved to Heathrow at 1 a.m., where they were both placed in detention, along with other foreign nationals waiting to be deported. Yes, they were in detention because the UK was going to deport them. So again, what was this speech? What was so incredibly inflammatory about this speech? Sellner observed that the UK will open its border to immigration, but blocking dissenting opinions will only help grow the silent majority that disagrees with the government, calling the affair a disgrace. Originally, the identitarian leader was scheduled to speak at a conference organized by UKIP Youth Wing Young Independents. UKIP stands for United Kingdom Independence Party. It's my understanding that UKIP is seen as a radical right-wing party. If you know otherwise, please leave a comment below. But this was shut down due to alleged far-left extremist threats. In other words, the Black Bloc, Antifa, which is quite strong in the UK and Europe. If you haven't seen the Hamburg riot videos yet, I suggest you look them up. It was disgusting. I don't think it speaks well of the United Kingdom's government when threats by a terrorist organization are allowed to put down a speech designed to talk about freedom of speech. Sellner's speech, reorganized for Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, which was set aside for free speech by an act of Parliament in 1872, was on the subject of threats to free speech in the modern world. Honestly, the guy was going to speak at a corner that is reserved for free speech by an act of Parliament in order to talk about threats to free speech, and he was shut down. How much more Orwellian can you get? Sellner and Pettibone were intercepted at Luton Airport, housed at Heathrow Detention Center, awaiting deportation. Breitbart London spoke to both Sellner and Pettibone, who said they were being held in separate detention centers. Pettibone alleged that border officials told her that one of the reasons for her detainment was not only because of Sellner's speech, but also her plans to interview former English Defense League leader turned citizen journalist Tommy Robinson. If you don't know who Tommy Robinson is, you should look him up. He's quite an entertaining figure. He's also quite smart. He is not just some bomb-throwing radical. And again, an interview. What could possibly go wrong with an interview? It's written word. Here's the Daily Wire article about Lauren being banned from the UK. Lauren Southern detained, banned from entering UK for racism. Canadian right-wing journalist and activist Lauren Southern says she was detained in the French port town of Calais Sunday night by UK authorities under the Schedule 7 Anti-Terrorism Act, which allows law enforcement to stop, search, and interrogate those under reasonable suspicion of being involved in terrorism. Accusing her of the distribution of racist material, British immigration authorities ultimately banned her from entering the country. I learned from Tim Pool's video on this yesterday that the racist material may be referring to pamphlets that Lauren handed out a month or so ago that read something along the lines of, Muhammad is a gay prophet. Inflammatory, yes, but enough to get you banned from a country? Yet again, the UK is overreacting in a way to protect the Muslim community's feels above all else. This is what the UK has become. They ban gun ownership almost outright. They arrest people for making offensive tweets, Facebook posts, and YouTube videos. They allow grooming gangs, rape gangs, kidnapping gangs, murderous thugs to roam free for 40 years and victimize thousands of young girls. But they have the time to throw two people who are interested in free speech and a simple interview into detention and then deport them, and outright ban a third from ever entering the country again. Now, if you haven't heard already, Pettibone and Sellner are out. They were released earlier Sunday afternoon, and they have been flown back to Austria. I am not aware of Lauren's status at the moment. I'd like to make one final note. I am not an identitarian, and I am not an alt-righter. I have certain views, especially those that are not very politically correct, regarding bending over backwards for certain faiths and the God-given rights of freedom of speech and to protect yourself from harm. I know America is not perfect, but I think Britain has shown its true colors and needs to be taught a lesson. If you can get over there and make yourself heard, go for it. If you could make yourself heard in other ways, through letter writing, through family that you have over there, friends, please do so. Europe and Great Britain are the canary in the coal mine for us. They may be lost, but there is still hope. We need to fight, and we need to fight hard to make sure that Western values are not completely swallowed up by mass migration and multiculturalism. That's all for now. Until next time, be well, and as always, thank you for your attention. Oh, that was a good one!